All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And if we have folks that join as we're going, we'll just let them in as we go. But I appreciate everybody showing up on time this evening and taking some time out of your evenings to learn about community water safety. My name is Craig Sears. I'm president and owner of Sears Pool Management, as well as Greater Atlanta Water Safety Alliance. I am joined this evening by Megan Harris, who is our staffing manager here at Sears Pool, and she's assisting as well during this presentation. So we'll go ahead and get it kicked off. The presentation should take about 30 minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A as well. So first of all, by way of introduction, who is GAWSA, or Greater Atlanta Water Safety Alliance? It was formed in 2012 by me as a chapter of the NDPA, which is the National Drowning Prevention Alliance. We are a registered 501c3 nonprofit. We are not attorneys, and we do not provide legal advice. So anything that you see in this presentation is not deemed as legal advice. Please run this by your HOA attorney before deciding to follow any of this advice. Our mission is to reduce the incidence of drowning as a leading cause of accidental childhood death, to reduce the exposure and transmission of RWIs, which is our moniker for recreational water illnesses. The CDC came up with that. To increase the popularity of recreational swimming, and to advocate for swim lessons, learn to swim programs, and the sport of competitive swimming. So pretty broad, everything, aquatics. We love the water and want to see more people enjoy it and be able to enjoy it safely. We do have people from, I think this evening, from different places around the country joining us. So just also want to mention that the comments here today are primarily directed toward homeowners association pools in the Georgia area, or in the Atlanta, Georgia area, but a lot of this advice or information is applicable everywhere. So how do we execute our mission? Well, we're doing that right now with this webinar. One of the ways that GAWSA executes its mission is to conduct these water safety seminars and workshops. We can do them virtually. We can also do them at your pool. If this is something that you would like to have organized, you can contact me. And we do have some dates that we can look at setting something up at your pool. Basically, we talk to various different groups throughout the year in the community, various topics ranging from RWIs, drowning statistics, case studies, water safety programs, shallow water blackout, drain safety, et cetera, et cetera. We are growing our mission. We're participating again this year in the world's largest swim lesson, which is June 23rd of this year. We also have a fund set aside to subsidize swim lessons. It's a scholarship fund for underserved populations. So if you're interested in donating to that fund, you can contact me after the presentation. And our long-term goal is to build in aquatic facilities where we can serve the underserved populations in water safety and learn to swim instruction. So we'll start tonight by talking about drowning and making sure that we all have an understanding of what drowning is. A lot of times, I would say the general public probably does not know that much about drowning when it comes to what it really, really is. And the World Health Organization redefined it back in 2005 as the process of experiencing respiratory impairment from submersion or immersion in liquid. So this definition does not necessarily mean death. It doesn't even mean that they needed medical treatment. It just means that they were experiencing respiratory impairment from being underwater or under a fluid. It doesn't even necessarily mean that water went in the lungs. So there's three possible outcomes of a drowning event: either fatal, which is obvious, the person passed; non-fatal with morbidity, which means that they did not die, but they do have some lasting complications as a result of the experience; and then non-fatal without morbidity, which means no lasting effects, which is thankfully the majority of cases that we see. So now that we have a good understanding of what drowning is, let's talk about the quote unquote normal drowning timeline. This was established by Dr. Frank Pia, who basically studied how the process of how a swimmer becomes a drowning victim. So in this case, you have a swimmer who was swimming fine. They became a distressed swimmer because of some complicating factor. Maybe they got a cramp. Maybe they injured themselves on something. Maybe they impacted another swimmer or the surface of the wall or something that they're swimming in, and they became an active drowning victim. And if not rescued or not noticed or recognized and rescued, then they will eventually become a passive drowning victim. It's important to note that drowning does not look like what you see in the movies. Most people think that the person's going to be waving, calling for help, and that it would be really obvious. And in fact, that really is not the case. If someone can wave and call for help, they're what we call a distress swimmer. They actually haven't started the active drowning process. Once they start active drowning, the surface struggle can be as short as 10 to 20 seconds. And then they go into a period of involuntary breath holding of 30 to 90 seconds. Then they become unconscious. Then they may have hypoxic convulsions. They may aspirate water. And somewhere around the 3 to 4 minute mark, they may reach clinical death. And then post the 4 minute mark, they may reach biological death, which means brain death. So our goal is to make sure we get to the victim and resuscitate them before that 4 minute mark. Not a lot of time when you think about it, but that is the goal of life saving. So now that's a normal swimmer that we just talked about. What about our non-swimmers? So we have a lot of non-swimmers at our facilities, toddlers, little kids. It only takes seconds. This is the really scary part for a young child to need help. So a drowning victim a child can slip beneath the surface with literally no struggle or no gasping for air, and no sound. So there have been cases where adults have been standing right by the children and they've slipped under and the adult was none the wiser. So these slides here show a 1, 2, 3 second time lapse where that's all it took, and this child is underwater. Once they're underwater, these non-swimmers don't have the mobility to resurface, and so and they can become an active drowning victim. So what we want to encourage is learning to swim at an early age. I believe the American Academy of Pediatrics now says as young as 1 is okay to start swim lessons. A lot of aquatics experts say as soon as they start walking or as they are getting mobile, that's when you want to teach them swim lessons, because that's when they start seeing bodies of water. They're drawn to that, they're curious, and that's when we can get into trouble. So this video, hopefully this is going to play, is a 1 minute clip showing you what drowning actually looks like. Now, there's not a real victim in this video, but it is a pretty good reenactment.
An unsupervised child falls into the pool reaching for a floating toy. As they attempt to get to the surface, they go into what Dr. Frank Pia identifies as the instinctive drowning response. Recognizing an individual in this response is critical because they may only be at the surface less than 60 seconds. The mouth is above the surface. They inhale and exhale quickly. Yelling or calling for help will be rare since the instinctive drowning response of the body is to breathe. The head will be tilted back and the mouth will be open. They push down on the water surface with their arms, attempting to keep themselves above the surface. They will vertically bob in one location and not move in any direction. Voluntary movements such as waving for help, swimming, or reaching a rescue support device is overridden by the body's natural defense mechanism to breathe. Remember, recognition of the instinctive drowning response is critical because the individual may only be at the surface for less than 60 seconds, approximately the length of time of this clip.
So we like to show this video as an example because it's pretty realistic and illustrates it pretty well.
An unsupervised.
Oh, sorry. All right, so adequate supervision at the pool is obviously key. Let's go ahead and bring these up here. So drowning is the leading cause of accidental injury death for children ages 1 to 4. The leading cause. That's pretty eye-opening and shocking for many people to hear. It's the second leading cause of older children. The only thing that supersedes that is traffic accidents. And that, if you think about it, makes sense because then older kids get more mobile, they're carried around more. 75% of drowning victims are male. So, who do we want to watch out for at the pool? Well, those 1 to 4-year-old boys are the ones that are most likely to go down, and quickly. Minorities drown at higher rates than Caucasians due to less access to water and instruction, as well as cultural stereotypes and fears that are passed down generationally. That's one of the areas that we are trying to address at Greater Atlanta Water Safety Alliance. 90% of child drowning death occurs when a caregiver is present but became distracted. More drownings occur in shallow water than deep water. That shocks a lot of people, but that's where you typically have a young child getting in and they're just inching deeper and deeper till all of a sudden they're too deep and it's too late. Approximately or close to 4,000 people drown fatally annually in the United States, and twice as many non-fatally drown. Most of these incidences are occurring in the summer months, and half of them occur in group settings, which means that there are more than one person around, there's a group around, and people aren't noticing. Even if your pool is lifeguard staffed, it's really important to remind parents of their supervisory responsibility and that it does not end the moment they come in the pool gate, even if the lifeguard's there. And then lastly, this piece of advice is really important. When a child is missing, always check the water first. That's where it's going to be most critical to find them and perform a rescue. In the world of water safety and aquatics, we talk about the concept of layers of protection, and the more layers, the better, because we never know which layer is going to save a life. So all of these bullet points up here are examples of layers of protection. First being a close supervision by a guardian, a lifeguard or a water watcher, which we're going to elaborate on later, but this is a water watcher card to the right. So this is a card that attached to a lanyard that someone can wear to identify themselves at a group event and let them know that, hey, I'm watching the water. I'm responsible for the water. And what this does is it helps keep that person focused on that so they don't get distracted with other things that may come up. And it also alerts any other party goers at the event that this person is actually doing something. So don't walk up and strike up a conversation with them. They are actually watching the water, trying to keep people safe. Self-closing and self-latching gates are really important. Every year, children drown because they gain access to facilities that they shouldn't have had access to. Pool fence and or a mesh safety fence is also highly recommended for backyard pools. Pool alarms come in many different types. Some are more residential focused, some are more commercial focused. We're going to talk about Virginia Graham Baker compliant suction outlets. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Those are your drain covers. Putting a safety cover on in the wintertime, that is a layer of protection. Swim lessons are considered a layer of protection. They reduce the likelihood of drowning by, I think it's between 80 to 90%. A U.S. Coast Guard approved life jacket, and I will emphasize U.S. Coast Guard approved because we have a lot of products out there on the market that look attractive and fit, comfortably and are marketed well with lots of popular children's themes, but it doesn't mean they're U.S. Coast Guard approved. And if they're not U.S. Coast Guard approved, that means that they may fall off the child too easily. They also need to be properly fitted, particularly when you're going out on the lake, so that they don't fall off, especially if you're doing water sports. And family CPR, learning how to do CPR as a family is super important and a great layer of protection. So let's talk about pool drain safety. The young lady on the screen there is Virginia Graham Baker. She died at the age of 7 after drowning from becoming suction entrapped on a spa main drain. The spa main drain was a single main drain and it had a flat grate on it, which allowed her body to create a suction seal between her and the pump to the point where multiple adult men were not able to remove her, and she unfortunately drowned and died in front of their eyes. So because of that tragedy and several others, legislation was passed in 2007 to make sure that these submerged suction outlets are safe going forward. And now what you see in all commercial pools, or should see in all commercial pools, are these compliant grates. So this is an example of one on the right here, where you see the shape is convex, which makes it difficult for you to form a seal with your body over it, as opposed to the older ones that were flat and flush. It is important to note that just replacing these grates is not the only thing that makes you compliant. You also need to check the sump depth, which is the area underneath the grates, and your equalizers, which are part of your skimmer system. And it's also really important to note that this law only applies to commercial pools in the United States. So residential pools are not required to be compliant. However, you cannot buy, it's illegal to sell the non-compliant grates anymore in the United States. So from that respect, anytime somebody replaces a grate, they have to buy a new one. It's also important to note that these grates now have an expiration on them. Most of the major manufacturers expire, their grates expire about 5 or 7 years after installation. The problem with that is that there is no database to track that. Each pool owner, meaning if you're an HOA, you have to track the records of the last time that those grates were changed so that you know the next time they need to be changed. Prior to this law, you didn't have to do that. You only had to change the grates when they broke. But now you have to change them if they break and when they expire, every 5 to 7 years in most cases. It's also important to know that outside the United States, this law does not apply. And what happened when this law passed is that the manufacturers, all of the stock that they had of the old-fashioned flush grates, they got shipped overseas. So if you go on vacation somewhere overseas and you're visiting in a pool, you might be swimming in a pool that is not compliant. It's always important to look for those non-compliant grates and avoid them. So what is shallow water blackout? This is kind of a scary sounding thing, and it can be. So it's a loss of consciousness caused by cerebral hypoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain. It typically occurs with free diving, breath hold, exercises, and breath holding games, which is why we tell all of our guards, we don't allow breath holding games at our pools for this exact reason. A primary causal factor is hyperventilation, and we'll explain why. So in your blood chemistry, if you take a breath and you hold your breath, eventually you're going to feel like you really need to take another breath, like you're running out of oxygen. That urge to breathe is triggered by CO2 levels elevating in your blood, not by oxygen dropping. It's a common misconception. So how does hyperventilating affect that? Well, hyperventilating artificially expels excess CO2, therefore lowering the CO2 level in your blood and delaying the feeling of that urgent need to breathe. So what can happen is your O2 level drops too low, you can pass out, and a person may never feel the urgent need to breathe. And if that person happens to be underwater, we've got a problem. If you did that on land, you just pass out and start breathing again. But here's how it looks graphically. So a normal breath hold, you would take a breath and you'd go underwater. Your oxygen level here in red would start to fall as you use oxygen. Your CO2 level would start to rise. The CO2 level reaches the point where it triggers that urgent need to breathe, and you, the bather, would surface and you take a breath at the second line here where the blue ends. And you see what happens is the CO2 is expelled, so the level goes back down to normal, and the oxygen comes back up to normal, and everything's fine. But what happens in a shallow water blackout example or hypocapnia, somebody hyperventilates before they go underwater. And so what does that do? Well, it doesn't really change your oxygen level. That's what you trick your body into thinking. You're adding oxygen, but it doesn't really have much effect on the oxygen level in your blood. It stays around the same. However, your CO2 is now artificially lowered. And in doing that, this delays the feeling or the sensation of that urgent need to breathe significantly later. The problem is that your O2 level drops to the blackout point before you reach that urgent need to breathe, and the person blacks out underwater, which is why we call it shallow water blackout. And this is why we don't allow breath holding games in our pools. So it's good to be aware of that. Also important is CPR protocol. If you have taken CPR protocol recently in the past few years, they came out with a version of it called bystander CPR, and basically what this is it's hands-only CPR where there's no rescue breathing or no rescue breaths administered to the patient or the victim. That may be fine for the person in Publix who collapsed due to a heart attack and was breathing right up to the moment that they collapsed, because they still have some oxygen in their blood that can be circulated. However, for a drowning victim who has been deprived of oxygen, their oxygen level has already dropped. And if you are doing hands-only CPR on a drowning victim, you're not helping them. You're circulating blood that has no oxygen in it, and they're still dying. So rescue breaths are absolutely essential for drowning victims as part of CPR protocol. So let's talk about recreational water illnesses. And I'll tell you, this is the grossest slide that I have in the whole presentation. So if you're eating, you might want to put down your fork. Why do we worry about RWIs or recreational water illnesses? Well, it turns out pathogens are really common in our water. Diarrheal illness is really common, and fecal contamination happens, unfortunately, much more often than we care to admit or acknowledge. So the CDC found out, and I'm glad that I did not volunteer to do this study. I'm glad I had nothing to do with this study. But according to their study, the average person or swimmer carries around 0.14 grams of feces into the water with them on their bodies. So we are carrying this into the pool with us. This is why showering before you get in is so important, even though many people disregard that. 11% of the population has diarrhea at any given time. Again, another CDC statistic. The good news is that we do have separate protocols now, as of a number of years ago, for solid fecal contaminations versus diarrheal contaminations. And the solid fecal contaminations, we can raise the chlorine level to at least 2 parts per million and close for approximately 30 minutes and be good. Why is that? Well, because they found that in solid feces, the types of things that we worry about there are E. coli, Giardia, and a few other bugs. They get killed, they have a low resistance to chlorine, and they get killed relatively easy with normal levels of chlorine. They just need some time, roughly 30 minutes or so, and we can get back in. But for a diarrheal incident, we have the likelihood that that person might have cryptosporidium. The picture up there is a cryptosporidium oocyst, which is this, you see it's hatching out of that cyst, and it looks like an alien. And it looks, it looks gross because it is. So that bad boy has a protective coat or shell around it and is highly resistant to chlorine levels, normal chlorine levels. So we've got to shock the pool, meaning going up to about 20 parts per million, which is well above where we want to be when swimmers are in the water, and close the pool. And we recommend for at least 24 to 28 hours because of the fact that most of the pools that we manage are outdoor and have stabilizer in them, and stabilizer delays the effectiveness of the chlorine. So why are we talking about all this? Well, we want, and we're asking you to please encourage your patrons to report fecal contaminations. Fecal contaminations happen much more often than we care to admit or acknowledge. As I said before, people are embarrassed when they happen, and so they often will not report them. But the problem that creates is that we could have patrons swimming in water that has been contaminated and we don't know it. And unless we get them out and do a proper treatment, people could be getting sick from that. So one more slide on RWIs. This is for non-fecal illnesses, and we're just going to focus on this one here, swimmer's ear, which is caused by the pseudomonas bacteria, because we get a lot of questions about this every year. And a lot of people think, well, I got swimmer's ear from the pool. Well, maybe you did, but it's much more likely that you probably got it from the environment, because this bacteria is all over the place. It's in the dirt, it's in the environment everywhere. However, you do enhance or increase your risk factors when you go swimming because of several things. What happens when you go swimming? You are exposed to water. The longer your head is under, the more water you may get in the ear, and some of it may get trapped in there. You also lose your protective earwax the longer you're in there. And so what happens when you get water trapped in your ear? Well, it's very irritating. So, and if you're a child, you want to, it's itchy, right? So you stick something in your ear to scratch it. It might be your finger, might be a pencil, might be something else, maybe even a Q-tip. But when you do that, you can cause a minor scratch to the ear canal, which then opens up that ability for an infection to happen. You also introduce with your finger or your pencil or whatever, that bacteria into your ear, and voila, you have an ear infection. And if it continues to go untreated, you have swimmer's ear. So how to fix that or how to prevent it? Well, keep your ears dry. Make sure your ears get dried out after swimming. Ask your children, did you get all the water out of your ears? You can use eardrops. Commercially available eardrops have alcohol and glycerin in them, which are very effective at drying out the water that might be trapped in your ear, as well as killing any bacteria that might be in there. So now let's talk about the biggest, probably one of the biggest topics that you're going to hear about this summer is staffing shortages. So we get a lot of questions about this, and I've done a considerable amount of research on it. Why do we have such a big staffing shortage? Well, if you take a step back and look at long-term teen summer employment trends, they are not favorable. They do not look good. From the 1940s to the 1980s, we had anywhere from 46 to 58% of teens working during the summer. And then starting in the 90s, things started to trail off and fall substantially down to where we are today, which hovers somewhere in the 30 to 35% range of teens that are working in the summertime. What the statistic does not show is that, yes, they're involved in the workforce, but they are working fewer hours per week. So not only are they fewer teens working, but they're working fewer hours a week. So if we were to hire, say, 3 teens today, that they might cover the same number of hours that one teen worked 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So why has the teen labor participation rate fallen so much? Well, a lot of people assumed, and I will have to say I was guilty of this assumption as well initially, it's just a work ethic thing. These kids are getting lazy, they don't understand it. And there are some cultural changes that are going on that we need to address as well. But we have to look really at the statistics here that show it's not just that simple. These kids are enrolling in higher and higher rates in college education. And because of that, they are participating less and less in the workforce. So they're doing exactly what culture has pushed them to do. They're enrolling in courses. They're taking, many of them taking summer school courses. And it used to be when I was growing up, and maybe you as well, that the kids that took summer school is because they fell behind during the school year and they needed to catch up. Now what happens is teenagers take summer school because they want to get ahead. They want to enhance their chances of getting into the college of their choice. And so by getting additional credits, that will help them. And so what is that doing? Well, it's shortening the window of time that teens have to actively work. And so now what we're seeing is that the average teenager who applies with us to Lifeguard may only work with us for a year or two, whereas 10, 15 years ago, they might be more inclined to work 3 to 4 seasons before they kind of throw in the towel and decide to get a full-time job. So why is the shortage so severe with lifeguarding? Well, there's a lot of factors that we as an industry face. First off, due to COVID, it has now affected 3 school years of interrupted recruiting, where we used to be able to get into schools and recruit directly from these schools. We were not allowed in for 2 seasons or 2 years for sure. And then this last season was very dependent on the school system, whether or not they would allow us in. So during that time, guard certifications expired, lifeguard instructor certifications expired, and there were not enough new classes being offered for guards or instructors. So basically, as people expired, then they found other stuff to do. So as another, if you could mute yourself, please.
Thing that's come up from one.
All right, and the J1 visa has been something that the industry has relied on to supplement staff for a number of years. That has also been on hold throughout the pandemic and continues to be on hold, where the numbers are very, very restricted as far as the number of visas for exchange students to come and work for the summer. So that's a major limiting factor. And then all these folks in aquatics, many of them left the industry over the course of the pandemic, because what many of us here in Georgia don't realize is that we were extremely lucky. We were able to open our facilities both years during the pandemic and do so safely without having any breakouts. But a lot of places around the country just flat out closed the facilities because they didn't want the liability. And so these folks that were employed at those facilities had to go find other opportunities. And now they're happy doing what they're doing and have not come back to aquatics. That's another reason why our industry's been hit so hard. You've probably heard about the Great Resignation, and we see the effect of that is that teenagers that are able to work are filling those jobs that adults have retired from or have left because they're higher paying jobs. So why not? As we mentioned before, working teens are now working fewer hours on average. We've seen a return now of summer internships and travel due to the pandemic winding down. We've seen a big generational and cultural shift over the course of the pandemic toward flexible work and what I'm calling gig work. So things like babysitting or refereeing kids' sports games, things like that, where they're short-term gigs, they pay well, and a teen is happy with just doing that. In the post-COVID world, remote work has become the new norm, and it's become very desirable. So we're also seeing more teens making money online and working remotely at their convenience. And we're also seeing parents who are able to work remotely can now afford to take longer vacations, whereas they may have only been allowed to take a 1-week vacation in the summer. Now they can probably stretch that to 2 or 3 weeks because of the fact that they can work remotely. And what happens, of course, they take their kids with them. So that means they're not available to Lifeguard. All right, so what can we do to find more lifeguards? Well, you may, if you live in one of our communities and hire us for lifeguards, you may have seen we've been placing now hiring lifeguards signage around in a number of communities where we're really trying to drive numbers up. That has had some positive effect, just making sure that people are aware of the opportunities. You can help by sharing the lifeguard jobs on social media. You can share posts directly from our social media. You can e-blast your community and swim team. We do offer a referral program. We recommend referral programs highly to, even if you're not our client. We pay a referral fee, and that referral fee also enters you into a scholarship contest. If you can connect us to your local organizations that have access to potential candidates. So we're talking about youth groups and clubs of teens that might be considering a summer job. And then we also provide subsidized training for anybody who cannot afford the training certifications. And I will say one word of caution we have run into is that we've seen an increase of people interested in doing things online. And so there's a couple of organizations that we're aware of that are offering online only certifications for lifeguarding. As you probably can imagine, this is not a good idea. The major accrediting organizations or certifying agencies have online content, but they still require classroom or pool time, skill practice, and completion prior to certification. But a couple of organizations are representing themselves as providing certification through online only. Please be aware of that. We've seen people get duped by that, pay those for those certifications, and basically they're useless. Nobody will hire with that certification because they haven't been tested. Their skills haven't been tested or demonstrated. If you're looking to apply with us, you can apply at searspool.com. So let's talk about water watchers. I said we were going to elaborate on that earlier in this presentation. So a water watcher is a volunteer, somebody who has said, I'll help watch the water either by myself or with a lifeguard. So what is that? How do we differentiate there? Well, both roles watch the water to prevent and respond to accidents. Both can enforce basic pool rules. Both should be readily identifiable by either a tag or a uniform. And it's good to know that there are Good Samaritan laws here, certainly here in Georgia and most places around the country, that offer protection for both. But you might want to, again, we're not providing legal advice. You might want to confirm that with your HOA attorney regarding the water watcher protection. Certainly it's there for lifeguards. Water watchers, however, will not be trained to perform water rescue and resuscitation, but they can assist the lifeguards as needed as a ready bystander. And water watchers are volunteers, so they may not be covered by insurance. A way to try to get them covered by insurance, because we do get questions about this, is to discuss with your HOA board and either deputize or authorize them as a function of the board or as a committee that the board has authorized to exist and serve the community. And by doing that, the D&O coverage that you have for your community should extend to those volunteers. But again, ask your agent there. The details may differ depending upon the policies that you have. This page, and I'm happy to share these slides if you'd like. If anybody would like them, you can send your email to me, and I will gladly share a copy of these slides rather than you trying to scribble down all these websites. But these are some really great water safety resources for your community. We have a Facebook page here at Greater Atlanta Water Safety Alliance that stays active, usually at least 2 to 3 posts a week with pertinent water safety information and water safety news. The Pool Safely campaign is a government-sponsored campaign by the Consumer Product Safety Commission that is fantastic. If you're looking for PSAs, short videos to share socially with your community on your social media, poolsafely.gov has some great PSAs up there to check out. The National Drowning Prevention Alliance, great organization. Red Cross has Whale Tails program, which is wonderful for children instruction for water safety. The CDC has its Healthy Swimming site, which has a lot of the RWI information that we covered and more, plenty more. And National Water Safety Month. This is National Water Safety Month here in May. This is one of the main reasons that we're doing this webinar this month. Shallow Water Blackout Prevention.org is one of the leading organizations funding and helping education for that particular issue. And the Association of Aquatic Professionals has a campaign called Respect the Water. It's a very long website, but if you Google Respect the Water campaign, that will come up for you. All right. we have reached the end of the presentation. And so if there's anybody that would like to ask a question, we can open the floor to that. I see that somebody has asked for the slides, so we can definitely do that. Thank you, Tiffany. And I think you guys should be able to unmute yourselves if you have a question, so feel free to do that. I'm going to stop the screen share so we can see each other if we want.
Hey, this is Michael Grant. I'm at North River Crossing. One of the questions that I wanted to ask was specific to our pool. You had mentioned the drains and how we had changed the drains per regulations after the drowning of that young child. How do we make sure that our pool is compliant? Is there a way for us to know that? Or since y'all are there, have y'all already done that to say, oh yeah, hey, your drains are up to date and compliant with what the regulations are now?
So that's a great question. I can tell you that you definitely have the newer style drain grates. We'd have to check and see when they were installed. The expiration depends on the manufacturer, the model, and the timeline starts at the time of installation. The reason that is because the grates are made of plastic, and the plastic is rated to be resistant to pool chemicals and UV light of the sun. And so that's why they're rated for typically anywhere from 5 to 7 years, depending upon the manufacturer. So there's not a way to necessarily know that unless we know the last date that your pool was resurfaced. So if we resurfaced your pool, for instance, that's usually the most common time to change out all your plastic fittings. And so that would be the best way to tell if when it was changed last. And then we can check the size and the model and the manufacturer of the grates based upon that. I mean, we can look at it and determine that to let you know the life expectancy of it. But the pool owner is the one who's actually responsible for maintaining those records, because there's not any national database to do that. If we changed them, we'll have it in our records. But if we did not change them, we won't have them. We won't have that information in our records. But ultimately, it is up to you as a board to track that. That's one of the most critical pieces of information to keep on file and to hand off from one board to the next when the board transitions.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
He said Black River Crossing, correct?
Yes. That's a good thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we can double check with your maintenance supervisor what information we have too.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Craig. This is Susanne from Heritage Park. Thank you for a great presentation. A similar question. So your team is in the process of resurfacing our pool in the community. So assuming that based on what you said, you would all have the records. Is it possible, do we just need to contact our maintenance supervisor to ensure that those records are given to the management company? So that way, because boards can change, and just so that way no one is fishing, or at least the management company can remind the whatever who's serving the next term of the board that at the 5-year mark you need to change these drains, even though the resurfacing might occur at a different cadence.
That's a great question. And so yes, we are resurfacing your pool. So basically what we would be able to do is we could just probably send you an email or an invoice that says, these grates were changed when your pool was resurfaced. And we would just recommend that you keep that on file, or Heritage, if that's your company, keeps that on file.
Okay, thank you. And would it have in that note, like you need to, the recommendation is to change out those grades at, this year, whatever that next interval is, so that way they know that as well?
Yes, great question. We can, I'll double check with my staff and make sure that we do provide that information to you. Because I don't offhand, I don't know what size or type are being put in. But we are limited because they're not, even let's say, 12 by 12 grate of one manufacturer and a 12 by 12 grate of another manufacturer doesn't necessarily fit, one for one. So they're not all apples to apples in the way that they fit. And we have to go with the frame that's been installed in the pool shell so that the grate will fit properly. So we can't always just pick the manufacturer with the longer life expectancy. We have to kind of go with what frame was originally installed when the pool was built.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Although sometimes we can change the frame if that's, if that's requested. I'd have to check on that. It's an extra bit of labor to do that. Great questions. Anybody else got questions? But we are here for you guys, both as Sears Pool as well as Greater Atlanta Water Safety Alliance. Either way, I'm very passionate about water safety and advancing the causes of the Greater Atlanta Water Safety Alliance. So if you have any questions about that, would like to get involved, would like to make a donation to the scholarship to provide swim lessons to underserved communities in the Metro Atlanta area, let me know. And I'll be happy to tell you how to do that. Or if you'd like a presentation to your community, contact me about that, and we can also discuss that too. If there are no more questions, I will let everyone enjoy their evening. And thank you so much again for attending, and wish you a happy and safe Memorial Day weekend coming up here. And let us know if we can help in any way. Thank you.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.